Welcome back to Mean Streets, the podcast where we investigate the best, worst, and forgotten movies of film noir and more. I'm Luke Deckard.
And I'm Matthew Booth.
And we are your cinematic sleuths, and it's time to crack another case. Matt, what case has been dropped on our desks this week?
Well, this week we've been tasked with investigating 1980s The Long Good Friday, starring Bob Hoskins, Helen Mirren, and Paul Freeman, written by Barrie Keeffe and directed by John Mackenzie. The IMDb logline is: an up-and-coming gangster is tested by the insurgents of an unknown, very powerful threat.
It's a hell of a logline.
A hell of a logline. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's gripping. It's gripping.
Well, and it's like all best stories. It can, it can be summarized into that one line.
But is that one line? Here's a question. We'll start this thing off. Is that one line? Maybe is it better than the actual final product? We don't need to answer that yet, but we'll leave that for the audience to mull over.
We might answer that in the discussion.
Yes. Does that or maybe better, does that logline oversell the thrills that actually befall you throughout this 2-hour adventure?
I think we'll get onto that.
I guess we can kind of like share first impressions. And maybe that question is a bit of a giveaway of some of my first impressions of this.
Yeah, I think it might have been. I think
I think on an acting level, I think there are some very good performances throughout this. I think Bob Hoskins is fantastic.
Yeah.
And scene stealing when he is there. He is on fire in pretty much every scene.
Yeah.
And it is the story is a very compelling story, and there's a lot of thematic stuff that I want to get into a bit later that I thought was a very interesting commentary on early 80s Britain. So that I thought added some intrigue, and maybe a bit like Pool of London. I loved that it captured a version of London that, even though is not that old, relatively speaking, is pretty much gone now. And I liked that.
Yeah, this a bit like Pool of London, and like Get Carter. This is a snapshot of history, and it is also very much. And there's a big caveat to what I'm going to say about this film, and that is, you have to remember it. It's very much of its time.
It is
very much of its time. But as a commentary on what life was like at that time, it's pretty compelling. The performances, I agree. Hoskins is the star of this. It was written for him. The role was written for him. I think Mirren is fabulous in almost everything, but certainly in this. But then you have actors who were very much of the 1970s and 1980s TV, British TV, who aren't quite up to the same level, and because they are so good, it does show.
This is a very British film. Like, every once in a while, I will get nostalgic for 80s and early 90s British television shows. It's because I grew up on certain things, even though I grew up in the States. There were certain things that had a big impact, things like the 80s BBC Chronicles of Narnia adaptations that are, in some respects still amazing, and in other respects just cheesy as hell. And then things like Mr. Bean, and just being so fascinated by what British life looked like through the eyes or through the lenses of these cameras. And just having this, obviously things like also Wallace and Gromit, even though that's claymation, that's still a thing.
Yeah.
And Thomas the Tank Engine with Ringo Starr as the conductor. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's all the, and of course watching James Bond movies and blah blah blah. So I had grew up with a lot of British influence despite being in the States. And so I have this sort of there's this sort of warm, cozy feeling about thinking about and watching this era of Britain
Yeah.
that is quite fun, and so therefore I enjoyed that element of this movie of kind of going back to this very, very simple. I say simple, but it wasn't a simple time. It was a very complex time,
Very
but
complicated time.
it also just has this. There is just a quaintness to it,
It-
despite IRA threats.
yeah. I mean, this is what I mean when I say it's a product of its time,
Mm,
because very much like the Sweeney films and the TV series to a certain extent, at the time this was proper violence on screen, and this was
yeah,
dangerous violence on screen.
yeah,
Not so much now. It is dated, but I think it's unfair to judge it really from a 2025 perspective, and you have to remember what it would have been like at the time.
yeah,
And
yeah.
this was pretty grim stuff for 1980. I mean, I remember the first time I watched this. Um, my brother's 4 years older than me, so he'll have been about 14 when we watched this, and
Mm.
I'll have been 10. And I remember we watched around the same time we watched this, Omen 3, and a film with Lewis Collins called Who Dares Wins, which was about the
Mm.
SAS. And we thought we were watching, and we were in 1984 watching real brutal, violent, and in the Omen's case, scary films. Now,
Yeah.
the Omen 3 is not scary, and it's
No.
not very good. I can't say about Who Dares Wins because I've not seen it for a long time, but I still had maybe it's part nostalgia, it probably is, but I still had a feeling of thrill when I watched this film.
Mm. Yeah.
And that's what I mean about not really watching it through the prism of 2025 and a 50-year-old man. I'm sort of watching it for what the impact will have been like at the
Yeah.
time,
Yeah. I
because it
think
was made at a very important time in British history. This is the
yeah.
first the first first year perhaps of the Thatcher government.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
everything is happening,
Yeah.
in and around London at this time, and plans to renovate the docks were going on. They were happening. It's why
Yeah.
we've got Canary Wharf now. So
Yes.
it was
Yeah.
very, very up to date, this film,
Yeah.
when it was made.
And I think just to kind of really quickly bring back to the point I was trying to get to was that was you're saying because it's very, very British and of its time, and some of those actors weren't up to scratch. They're very TV.
Yeah,
There is that sort of when I think about Mr. Bean, I think about the Chronicles of Narnia, that those sort of BBC productions, some elements of James Bond films, things like that. There is that sort of there was always a sort of kind of cheap quality
yeah,
to
yeah,
certain
yeah.
British television shows. And it's just general production. And I do think that the Sweeney has not the Sweeney. I do think the Long Good Friday has an element of that sort of low production value,
Oh yeah,
uh,
definitely,
for better
definitely.
for better or worse. But which we'll get into shortly. But it has it does have a made for TV vibe, but
Yeah,
and there's a reason for that. But we'll crack
we'll
that
get
nut
onto that.
short.
And just
Shortly.
as an adjunct to that, the
Mm,
Sweeney films that were released cinematically, there were two of them. They also, the first one I think is the better one. They also have a very TV. They're like extended episodes of the
yeah,
TV series.
yeah,
So I don't think this is necessarily a cinematic film. I
no,
agree about that. I think it's it's a TV. I think it probably is a TV movie more than it's a
meant to be
cinematic
watched
one.
on your little tiny 24-inch black and white TV.
Yeah, it's meant to be watched on a portable telly. Yeah, with one of those aerials that never quite worked.
Yes.
But it, you know, it's no less powerful for that. Is all I'm saying. But
yeah. Well,
but it's definitely Hoskins' show. It's definitely Hoskins' show.
Oh God, yes, yes, absolutely. All right, well, we can go behind the camera and talk about how this thing got made. So it was released cinematically in 1981, but it premiered at the London Book Fair in 1980. So it's got this complicated 2 release dates. So we're putting on the cinematic release date, not the London Book Fair. So, you know, that's what's going on. It cost about 930 K to make this sucker. I couldn't, in terms of box office, I could only find the UK box office. I couldn't find an international box office, which is interesting. So, according to the UK box office, it made £426,000. Not a lot given that budget.
No, not a lot given that budget.
And I don't know if part of that budget, that cost, is part of, if that includes some of the rights issues, because we'll get into that in a minute, because there's a TV element involved in this, and there was a hefty sum that, you know, was paid to purchase the rights back from a TV network, from ITV, who were you know, involved at the time. So I don't know if that is included in that 930. Maybe it is.
Maybe it is.
You know, but
it doesn't look as if £930,000 was spent on this film.
No.
So I couldn't find anything either about. I mean, obviously, you can about the rights issues, but not about the actual funding of it. So I don't know if it includes that or not, and I couldn't find a world, you know, an international gross either.
No, I don't know why it's so. No, like heavily guarded. I don't know. I don't know if it's if heavily guarded is the right.
I suspect it didn't do very well because it is so quintessentially British.
Yes.
You know, that it could not have been made anywhere else and at any other time. And it's interesting that a remake has never materialized, although there's been talk about doing one, because I don't think it would work.
No.
It's so much of its time, this film, that it could only have been made in one place at one time. And I think that quintessential British element to it won't have done it any favors overseas.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. Yeah.
It's very British.
It is. It's, I mean, even though I've lived in this country for almost 20 years ish, coming up in the next few years, there was lingo and stuff, and I'm like, I get what he's saying, but like, what?
Yeah, well, we can talk about that, because that's one of the things that happened with the rights. That's one of the issues with the rights, isn't it?
Yes. So it's directed by John Mackenzie. He's known for The Fourth Protocol, A Sense of Freedom, The Last of the Finest. Not really a director I'm overly familiar with, not a filmography I'm overly familiar with, or frankly that interested in. I don't know about you.
No, I can honestly say, because I had a look at his filmography, because it's not a name I knew.
Yeah.
I think the only one that I can honestly, hand on heart, say I have seen is The Fourth Protocol. But he did a lot of TV work as well, which ties into what we're saying.
Yes,
a lot of you know, afternoon plays for today and things like that. He did. But it's not a director I know for anything apart from this.
No. He does come from an acting background, and I suspect that is maybe added a little bit of flair to getting good performances out of so many people, because I do think in general there are very good performances out of people. So, you know, he has skill.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, I don't know, he didn't really take off, you know? The Long Good Friday was sort of the big feature that kind of almost made him a name, and then he spent a while in Hollywood, but wasn't really happy with it. It wasn't artistically fulfilling, so they say. And therefore his, you know, The Long Good Friday seems to be probably the crown jewel in his filmography, but generally speaking, he is a forgotten
I
director.
think, yeah, I think he is. I think he is. I think he did he not make Ruby in the
No idea.
90s? Which is about the yeah, he did. It's about the assassination of Jack Ruby, who killed Lee Harvey Oswald. So it's a sort of proto sequel to JFK. But after that and the Fourth Protocol, this is what he'll be remembered for. This is what this film is what he will be remembered for, if he's remembered at all.
Yeah, yeah.
But he had he'd worked with Ken Loach on Kathy Come Home, apart from other things. So he will have learned. He was his sort of assistant director on that, I think. Second, and he will have learned from Ken Loach about grounded, gritty, realistic performances.
Yeah.
But this is Hoskins' show, and all the energy seems to go into Hoskins' performance, so that the others are sort of left in his wake. I mean, but there are loads of people in there that will have been familiar faces, if not names, to audiences at the time. The counselors in The Spy Who Loved Me is the submarine commander in The Spy Who Loved Me, and one of the secondary gangsters is the chef in Fawlty Towers. And Jeff, who is the second in command, is Charlie Fairhead in Casualty. He was in Casualty for about 100 years.
Yeah. So we got Paul Freeman, Belloc from Indiana Jones.
Belloc, yeah.
I was like, it's Belloc.
Yeah, and also we have got a James Bond in this film.
We do. We have baby-faced 25-year-old Pierce Brosnan.
Pierce Brosnan with one line, and that one line is high, and that was improvised. He was meant to be totally silent. So, but yeah, my point being, I think that these will have been familiar faces to the audience at the time, if not today.
Yeah.
But their secondary performances, I think, are down to the fact that all of Mackenzie's efforts go into Hoskins and Mirren.
Yeah, and mostly
because it's
Hoskins.
Their show. Mostly Hoskins. Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll crack this a bit more later on, but I think that comes with some problems. But that's all I'll say for now. So yeah, so on the writing side, a bit like the director Barrie Keeffe.
Yeah.
Again, he wrote for some TV shows, Adam Smith, No Excuses, Premiere, and Sus. Those are the biggest things he's known for. I don't know any of these things. I was like, I haven't seen a single thing that you have done apart from The Long Good Friday.
No.
Yeah.
Nor me.
Yeah. And The Long Good Friday is the only original screenplay that he had released. Apparently. So it's like, okay, and interesting. So yeah, it's a weird one in that you have two relatively unknown figures. Not that they were working directors and working writers, but in the grand scheme, they never went on to be anything more, I guess, which is kind of harsh to say. They had a few more credits afterwards, but nothing really wowed. And I don't know
to sort of bring him into the limelight. No, and Keeffe, I suspect, was more of a playwright than a screenwriter. And as is often the case with theatre, if you're not around to go and see it at the time, then you never really know about it or can say anything about it because you didn't see it. So how successful he was as a playwright, I don't really know. I've not really looked into Barrie Keeffe in any great detail.
That'd be that'd be for a playwriters podcast. They can
it would be
tell us about that.
But the majority of things, if you type his name into Google, most of what you get is this film.
Yes, yeah. This is a bit like Mackenzie. This is his crowning jewel. Now, we obviously mentioned the TV element of this piece, and it was originally titled The Patty Factor, which is a stupid name. Just what a dumb name. I'm sorry, stupid name.
And pretty racist.
Yeah. And well, there's a lot of racism in this film. We'll get there. We'll get there. So Keeffe was writing this for a producer named Hansen, who worked for Houston Films, which was a subsidiary of Thames Television. And the interesting thing, so he's basically writing a TV movie, is what he's doing. Mean Streets will return right after this. Who doesn't love a good boxing movie? Well, Steve Hunt presents the Boxing Movie Podcast. On each episode, Steve and his guests discuss a movie that has boxing as a theme. Do not be put off if you're not a fan of boxing, though. Of course, he covers the likes of Rocky and the sequels, but the depth of boxing-themed movies across cinema history is much greater than you might imagine. Boxing Movie Podcast has covered the early works of Hitchcock, explored the world of blaxploitation cinema and the golden age of film noir, with episodes covering The Setup, Champion, and Stanley Kubrick's Killer's Kiss. You might not have previously considered yourself a boxing movie fan, but after listening to a few episodes of the Boxing Movie Podcast, you may have to reconsider that view. Find the Boxing Movie Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. If you love Mean Streets, join us on Patreon and get exclusive perks, insider access, and a chance to shape the show.
Depending on the tier of your choice, get early episode access, your name in the credits, and have your questions read on air.
You can help us choose films for us to review, unlock exclusive commentaries and reviews, and join our members-only YouTube Live Q&As.
So slip on your trench coats, pull your fedoras down, and join us on Patreon today.
But the interesting thing is that the producer, Hansen, didn't have the way he had the contracts made out were made for film. They were film contracts rather than TV contracts. So he clearly had it in his mind that he maybe wanted this to go further, but it was initially going to be released via ITV, which is, for those in the US, that is another big network. That's like a CBS sort of thing over here in the old jolly UK.
Yeah.
But there was some tension there with some studio folks. They felt the film glorified the IRA. I don't know if I get that vibe. I didn't get the vibe that the film is glorifying the IRA. Or glorifying their actions. But I guess it is a complicated thing in that this is a film about gangsters and everybody is bad. And the IRA better or worse than Harold?
Yeah, well,
I don't know.
Yeah, and it's at the time the IRA were, that they were news upon news upon news.
Yeah.
It was a sensitive subject.
Yes. Yes.
And they were, if you put a drama out or if you released a film or a book or whatever that was taken the wrong way, then you could have some real trouble on your hands. So I think the very use of the IRA as a plot point, which is really all they are in this. This is really a film about Harold, more than it is about the IRA. They're really they are the invisible threat that the logline talks about.
Yeah,
But I think even the mention of them at the time will have put some backs up and will have caused some nervousness in the powers that be.
Yeah, and I guess mild historical context for those who might not know. I mean, the IRA were doing, the Long Good Friday is full of numerous bombings, and that is what the IRA were doing. They were this invisible enemy that were planting bombs all over the place. They planted them. There was car bombs, pub bombs.
Yeah.
Ambushes. They did all sorts of stuff. There was a Birmingham pub bombing in 1974. There's a pub bombing in the Long Good Friday.
Nothing really that happens in the film
hasn't happened.
Hasn't happened. Hasn't got some sort of basis in truth.
Yes.
So there were car bombs, and they were targeting pretty high up people as well.
Yes.
So they were a real, it was a real dangerous time.
Yes.
And gun running and all the rest of it. It was a well, one of the original titles for this film was Havoc, and that's what it was. That's what it was.
Yeah, definitely. So
People forget, but it was really a simmering like brew of violence waiting to spill over, and it was
yes,
they only kept the lid on it sort of by luck, really. It was in danger of boiling over at any
yeah.
moment.
Yes, yeah. And that's why it's so funny, and not in a like haha way, but in a oh god way. But like we look back on 70s and 80s Britain sometimes with these rose tinted goggles of like, oh, what a tweet. I mean, I was saying earlier, it's like it's so
Yeah,
nice and warm and so cuddly, and that's actually no, it was chaos.
yeah. Well,
It's
I mean,
not the,
we laugh about the Sweeney saying "get your trousers on, you nicked," which is an actual line from the show, and
yeah,
we laugh about all that, but they were, they were sort of dealing with this sort of stuff on a daily basis. The reality of it, you know, was brutal, and it was horrendous. And at the time, those more serious cop shows and TV shows were treating it seriously, and they
mm,
were reflecting what was going on. So, it's the sort of passage of time that makes it appear twee now.
yes,
But for every one of these, for every series like that, or every film like this, there was Bless My House, or
yeah,
Faulty Towers, or whatever else
yeah,
you might want to say. Uh,
yes,
so
yes. So
nothing
this
changes.
No, so The Long Good Friday was meant to debut on the 24th of March, 1981 on television, but there were problems. The producer Hansen was not happy with the way the film had been cut for ITV. It had been reduced to 75 minutes, and what he said was about 75 minutes of a film that was literal nonsense.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
is I part of me questions that because I have to admit one of my problems is it doesn't need to be 2 hours.
No, it doesn't need to be 2 hours, but you can't tell it in 75 minutes either.
I don't know. I think maybe you could. I'm not sure. A good
No, I don't
editor
think you could.
might be able to make this work, but it's
It's a
I don't know.
90-minute film. It's a 90
Maybe
minute film.
90, maybe 90, maybe
It's a
90.
90-minute film, because there are some bits where you do think, oh, come on. Because
Yeah.
it takes place over a period of 36 hours. So, and sometimes it
Yeah.
feels like it.
Yes, and that is a problem. Not gonna lie, that is a problem. But before it was transmissioned, a Beatle, George Harrison's
George
company,
Harrison, yeah,
the famous Beatle, his company, Handmade Films, purchased the rights back for this 200,000. Um, and I'm like, oh, okay. Is that again? I'm like, is that added on to that 930? Like, what is that? What is that? But he bought the thing back, and then the Long Good Friday was given a cinematic release, and the rest, as they say, is history.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know. Um, I guess we could talk a bit. We should probably focus a little bit on Hoskins at the moment, because, as you said, the role was written with him in mind,
yeah,
and he really is fantastic. He loved this role. This is the thing that made Hoskins a star. Was
yeah.
this performance?
He'd been in a couple of TV things. Famously, he'd been in Pennies from Heaven, a Dennis
Mm,
Potter TV play. But I think he knew that this was potentially his breakout role, and that
yeah,
he needed to give it everything. You know,
yeah.
and he does. I mean, I don't know if it's the role of his career, but if it's not, it's one of them.
Yeah, true. I mean, he has so many. I mean, Mario is clearly the role of his career. Super Mario Brothers.
There's a great interview with him when he didn't know what Mario was. When he took
Yes.
the role, he didn't know what it was, and his son asked him what his next role was, and he said, I'm playing Super Mario," and he showed it him, and he says, "And I saw this little red thing jumping up and down, and I thought, Jesus, I've played King Lear.
It's
I
true.
think that's a great quote.
Yes, no, it's a I love that. But I mean, he did. He loved this role. He was very very proud of this film and considered it very important for British cinema. And I think in some degree, yes. Um, I don't, it does not paint Britain in a very nice light by any
No,
means. Um,
I don't
and
think it
so I
intends
think
to.
no, I don't think it does either. And I think that's kind of the kind of the distinction that should probably be made is it is important. It does encapsulate a certain period of time, but it is a nasty film
Hmm.
about nasty people doing nasty things. And unlike other movies like The Godfather or TV shows like The Peaky Blinders, there really is no lovable crook in
No.
this. There is, it's there really there is nobody to root for in this piece. You're just an observer of vile people doing vile things, which is an interesting thing to observe.
Hmm.
But how that sits with you will probably vary. I don't know, but there were moments where it was just really not. It was sitting uncomfortably for me in
Mm.
certain spots, particularly the Brixton stuff when they go to Brixton and Hanson, Harold Shan's Bob Hoskins' character is super racist
Super
towards the
racist.
African American, or not African American, but the Afro Caribbean
Yeah.
individuals that he's coming across, and he busts into a house to get some information from this guy named Errol. He's a black dude, and he's banging a white girl, and that is all sorts of commentary in and of itself
In and
because
of
they
itself.
of the time it's of the time it is people are, I mean, there's obviously a lot of racism still today, but even back in the 80s, that
It
was that
it
that
was not
came with problems.
mixed race couples were not usual in
Yeah.
1980s Britain. That's
No.
just a fact. For
Yeah.
whatever reason, that is just a fact.
Yeah.
Um, and he is racist. I mean, it's interesting that he's racist towards uh, that community in Brixton, and he says something like, "These streets used to be filled with good people, decent people."
Yeah. It was. Yeah.
Now that's a horrendous line,
Yeah.
but the film is unapologetic about it, and yet
Yeah.
Harold has absolutely no problems, so we're led to believe, with homosexuality.
With his best friend Colin being gay. Yeah.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
it
So
made me think, like, why again, it's like, there's an element of me as I'm watching this film, I'm like, "Well, does he have to be so nasty? If he's all about progress, and he's all about this kind of stuff, like, does he need to be this racist? Does he need to be racist at all? Could he be a little bit could he be beyond this because he is trying to see beyond Britain where it is at the moment? If he's fine with his best friend being, being a gay man, apparently supposedly, like, could this not extend to that as well? Because I guess this is what I was saying. Like, there is there's nothing. I cannot root for him because he is a racist cunt.
yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. And although I think there will be people who watch this not because of the racist side of it, but because he
Mm,
is a man fighting to survive, that I think probably will root for him.
yeah.
Just in the sense that, yeah, he's a bad man, but he's trying to redevelop things now, and maybe he's trying to go legit, and he's just being bombarded from all sides, and everything
Mm,
is crumbling. But I have a problem with being asked to root for people like this because they are bastards,
yes. Yes.
and all you've got here is there's a bunch of bastards, and some are worse than others.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
very difficult to find something to cling on to.
Yeah.
Not just in this film. I don't mean just in this film. I mean in stories like this generally,
Yeah. I
where
agree.
I feel like it a bit in The Godfather. Although
Yeah.
you do have whichever son it is that's trying not to be a part of it, and then
Yeah.
he's dragged into it. Is that Al Pacino? Long time
I think
since
so.
seen
Yeah.
him. But films about gangsters, films about the Cray twins. The
Yeah.
you sort of think, well, I don't want to root for you.
No.
Why am I watching a
No.
film about you two?
No.
And
No.
films about anything like that, where the killers and the villains are the central piece, like films
Mm.
about the Moors murders, TV dramas about the Moors murders. Why am I being asked to learn about your lives?
Yeah.
I don't give a
Well,
shit about either of you.
no. It's this might be a silly example, but I'm just thinking about the Joker film, and I almost think that the Long Good Friday would have benefited from leaning more into that kind of attitude, and that is he's not a good guy.
Yeah, yeah, no, he's not a good guy. Or I think they should have made more of the fact that he's trying to deviate from it and
Yeah.
leave it all
Well, that's what
behind.
Peaky Blinders does. Peaky Blinders, the Tommy Shelby, the Cillian Murphy character
Mm.
is trying to legitimize his family's business. He's a crook. He has the police in his pocket. He has all this sort of corruption going on, but all he just wants to do is legitimize his gambling business. That's what he wants.
Yeah. So
And he goes on and he tries to do that, but he's also he's of the time. He's set in the 1920s and goes throughout that decade. But he's also a little bit more liberal with his thoughts on women. He's liberal with his thoughts on people of color and stuff like that. So, despite him being a gangster, despite him doing mean and cruel things, you do root for him because you see these things that are rootable. And this is what I was just sort of like. It's complicated because I didn't feel that the character of Shan was I couldn't root for him at all, but at the same time, I do think the film wants you to.
Oh, it does.
But
No, it does.
but when he's doing certain things, I'm looking at the script of this and I'm like, well, you've lost me entirely. I cannot at any point root for him, and I couldn't. He should die. He should lose. Everyone should lose because
They should all
everyone.
lose.
There's
Yeah.
no nugget of redemption in any of them, and that
No.
was. And I again, I think the point I'm trying to make is the frustrating aspect of that is, I think the film wants you to root for him, and the film doesn't understand that you should not be rooting for him.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely think the film wants you to root for him. I think it wants you to see him, and you just said that the Joker might be a stupid comparison or example. I'll make an equally stupid one. And I think the film wants you to look at him as though he was some sort of Shakespearean tragic hero that is brought down by his own nature, when all he wants to do is try and do something good, but it's misguided. So I mentioned Lear before, a bit like Lear, where he wants to do something good by giving his daughters the third each of the kingdom, but he does it for purely the wrong reasons and then suffers for it. And I think there is some, seeing a man's entire empire crumble because of himself and his attempts to solve that problem failing because of who he is. I think the film thinks that is vaguely Shakespearean. I could almost read that into it myself.
Yeah.
But it would be one of those Shakespeare plays where you are grateful that every single cast member is dead at the end. So a bit like Hamlet, and because I don't think you can't root for him, but I agree. I think the film wants you to. I think the film wants you to say, this is a bad man, but you've got to be behind him because there are worse men than him. And I think I could buy that if the start of the film when he's on the yacht with the counselor and all the rest of them talking about rebuilding and giving culture and sophistication to the world through London, is genuine and is a real effort to escape his past, and that he's closed down the corporation, as he calls it.
Yes.
And he is forced back into it through no fault of his own. Because what happens to him is not his fault. What happens to him is not his fault. It's a misconception, and it's a wrong conclusion. It's putting 2 and 2 together and getting 5. So then I would have sympathy for him if he had to go back to his old ways, when he was genuinely making an effort to make the world better and repent for him through no fault of his own. But that's not what we get, because I get the impression that he's still scheming and planning when he is giving that speech about rebuilding. Because he wants in with the Americans. He wants in with the mafia.
He wants in with the American gangsters.
Yeah. Yeah. So the film's asking you to do something that it doesn't give you any reason to do. And it could have done. It could have done.
Yeah.
I think
and in terms of like that hard-boiled film noir or noir kind of character, or not character, but thematic beat, we are looking at that Chandler line from, his essay, Simple Art of Murder. This is a world in which, gangsters rule nations and almost rule cities.
Yeah.
This is what we're witnessing. We are witnessing that. I just think I wish they just gone a little. They just should have just made Shand nastier. He just should have been nastier, because it was But hell of a performance, and I think Hoskins is right. He referred to the script as Shakespearean.
There you go.
the dialogue, the way that he rattles off his dialogue is truly special. Seriously, the way he is. Yeah, it's a powerful performance. And again, it's one of the things like, it's a shame that Barrie Keeffe didn't go farther, because this is some strong, punchy dialogue with wonderful colloquialisms and things like that.
It is. It definitely is, and it's very noir. In some ways, it's very Chandler. But there were occasions when I thought, now that's a very good line, but is it appropriate? And one of them, it's a very famous line, is when they're talking about Paul Freeman's character, who's been knifed by Pierce Brosnan in a swimming pool.
Yeah.
They're going to take the body away incognito in an ice cream van. And Harold says, well, there's dignity for you, being carted away like a raspberry ripple.
Yeah.
And I think we're meant to believe later on that you're so angry that Colin has been killed that you do something quite horrific to one of your close confidants, which we'll come on to. Whilst that is a very funny line and it's delivered brilliantly, is it appropriate? Would he say that in those circumstances? I'm not sure he would. It's a bit. It sounds too flippant to me.
Interesting.
To be the reaction to your friend, one of your close friends, being knifed in a swimming pool. And there's another example where they find a security guard crucified. I mean, this is nasty violence. They find a security guard crucified, and he says to Jeff, who's his second in command, he says, well, you would have a smart man like you would have noticed a man nailed to the floor, wouldn't he? You wouldn't have missed that. And I think, yeah, that's a funny line as well. But would you say it in these circumstances? And they rang a bit hollow to me, though.
Interesting.
I don't think he would have said them in those circumstances. Not given the relationship that he's had with Colin, certainly.
That's interesting. I didn't feel that way with those lines. I actually quite like the raspberry ripple line. I thought
it's a great line.
I guess the way I read that line was it's so undignified, and he's frustrated that his friend is being, in death, being treated in such an undignified way.
Yeah.
And that's kind of that was my reading on that. So I kind of like the line, but who knows what you say in these situations? Who knows?
Well, who knows what you do say? Yeah, I think I would have preferred it if somebody else said it, and then he gave him like a hiding for it.
Yeah,
You know?
I can
And
see
again,
that.
maybe this is because that would have made me empathize with him more. It
Yeah,
would have shown a
maybe.
bit of humanity, you know. Whereas the only real humanity I think we see, and even this is borderline selfish, is when Helen Mirren's character is crying and she says she
Yeah,
doesn't want to die.
yeah,
That's the only bit of humanity in this film. The rest of
yeah,
it is just
yeah.
nasty stuff.
And maybe that's it. Maybe that's just it. He's making the flippant comment about Colin being treated like a raspberry ripple. And he's making those other comments because at the end of the day, he really is a piece of shit.
Yeah, maybe it is. Maybe it is.
He really doesn't care about anybody except himself and gaining the things that he wants. He's not, you know, he only really cares about his mother, but even that, he doesn't go and see her.
Don't go and see her. No,
She's in the
no.
hospital, shocked after her car was car bombed, while she was at church, and
Yeah, yeah.
he's not even going to see either. So it's like, I think he's just a cold-hearted villain. He's like a British version of the Kingpin. He has no humanity to him at all, except for that. I agree that one moment with Helen Mirren, with Victoria, where she's crying. That is about the only moment
That's
that
when
you get
both the masks
something
fall.
human from him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's only spurred from her saying she doesn't want to die. But of course, she's in it as much as he is. So
Yes. Yeah.
she sort of deserves to.
Yeah. I mean, they all do. There's no. I can't sympathize with any of them. I'm like, yeah, you're all shitheads. Now, one problem that I had early on with this film stems from the opening a little bit. And while the opening is interesting, you got Belloc and Belfast, and he's taking a suitcase somewhere, and there's a trade-off, and there's a pub scene, and then there's suddenly some guys are thrown into a car. Then you next see them being their bodies dumped, and then the caskets, and then this woman's crying, and then she's spitting in some guy's face, and you are overwhelmed with so many faces,
Yeah,
no dialogue, and you don't know who's who or what's what.
yeah, yeah. I agree with
And
this.
it's very frustrating for me when I watch films and they do stuff like this, because I can see some like stupid film snob with a little cigarette being like, "Oh, but you just need to be paying attention to see what's going on." And I'm just like, no, this this just needs to be clear, more clear, because it's it's awkward and it's clunky and it's confusing, and I shouldn't be scratching my head being like, who okay, yeah, these people died. Why? Who killed them? Who who shot the people in that
Mhm.
house?
Yeah.
I still don't know. Right in this moment, I'm not sure who shot the people in that
No,
house or who
no,
the
I don't.
people in that
I don't
house
either.
were.
No, I don't. I don't know. I don't
You
know
know,
either.
and
And
eh,
yeah, I agree with all that. I agree with all that. I'm just thinking about who did shoot him. I don't think we're told. I don't think we're told.
yeah.
I don't
I don't
think
know,
we're
I don't
told.
think we are. I don't know where that comes from. I don't know if that was Jeff. I don't know. I do not know. I have no idea. I just don't know. And it's frustrating because then once we get to London and finally Bob Hoskins has his introduction with his little hippie music going on, his little techno disco, track, playing behind him. We're then rushed to the boat, and there's all these people on the boat, and they're talking about all these people that are coming, and then the Americans come, and then there's all of his cronies are around, and I'm like, I don't know really yet who is important
No,
to
yeah,
this
this is a
piece
problem.
except for Hoskins. That's it.
And that's it. Yeah, that's it. And Mirren. I mean, from the start,
Even
Mirren's
Helen
good.
Mirren, despite her being Helen Mirren, I'm like, I recognize her, but I also recognize Belloc, and I don't know, and he's dead now.
Belloc. Um, yeah, it is a problem that, and there are too many people. There are way too many people on the boat,
Yeah.
and my my overriding issue of that issue with that is that some of those people we don't need to know. We don't need to know the grieving widow.
No.
because she only comes back like towards the end of the film when he says he'll pay to look after her
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
her husband's been killed on his behalf, sort of thing, or because of
Yeah.
him, which is, I suppose, an attempt at redemption, but it's not properly done. So I'd be quite happy to lose her completely and
Same.
lose that whole subplot, because I think he's only a taxi driver and he's only there because Belloc can't drive.
Yeah.
Which is stupid.
Yeah.
Which is stupid. And he's now a very famous actor. It's called Kevin McNally, and he is the young lad that Belloc is coming onto in the pub.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, why was Kevin McNally in this? Other than to show that
gay.
That Belloc is gay, and then therefore is going to be tempted by Pierce Brosnan in Speedos.
But you could have just had that Pierce Brosnan scene.
But I could have just had Pierce Brosnan, because I know what's going on in that. The way he looks, I mean, he's called Paul Freeman. I can't keep calling him Belloc. Paul Freeman is such a good actor that you know what he's thinking the minute he sees Pierce Brosnan.
Yes,
so
really obvious.
Don't need any of that pub scene,
No,
at all.
No,
So
not
a lot of that setup, it is, to me, pointless. It's pretty pointless.
I agree. And
everything that happens is then told to us by Jeff on the boat later on.
Yeah.
And I know there's an old mantra of show don't tell, but in certain circumstances, I think it's forgivable, and this is one of them.
I think so. Definitely.
You could just have Jeff telling him, that this is what had happened.
Yeah, and
thereby losing a good 10 minutes of the film.
Yeah.
So we're already cutting into that extraneous runtime.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think the other problem that this has, because there's so much time wasted on superfluous characters doing things that could be cut, other characters that maybe needed to be emphasized a bit more are lost. I think the counselor character is very empty. He's a very empty character, and he's the linchpin. He's the one behind it all.
He's the just forgive me for the use of this word. He's the villain.
He is. Yeah. So it's like, okay, well, he was barely in it, so why do I care? But then in addition to that, you have the problem with Jeff and Victoria. Victoria, Helen Mirren's character, is pretty damn thin. She's pretty damn thin with, hardly a barely a two-dimensional character, in my opinion.
Without Mirren's input, she'd have been even worse.
Doesn't surprise me.
Most of what you see is Mirren. It was Mirren's idea that she should cry in the scene we've already talked about. It was Mirren who said, I will only play her if she is in control of Harold to a certain extent, and isn't just a mole.
Yeah,
because that's what she is.
Yeah,
that's what she is. It's Mirren that gives her any depth whatsoever.
Yeah, and because you can feel it, because there's very little going on. But then the other problem is Jeff, and I don't know about you, but I'm like, within the first 5 minutes, I'm like, yeah, Jeff's done something. He's fucked something up. He's clearly a bad guy.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely.
And then you get to that scene where him and Victoria are in the car and he's flirting with her, and I'm like, ooh, are they gonna get together? And he's like, I'm gonna lick every inch of you while they're in the elevator. I'm like, damn, okay, what's gonna happen now? And then she runs out of the elevator, and I'm like, for a second she was sort of into him, and now she's not. And it's like, and then you're sort of questioning, well, how bad is Jeff? Because then when Jeff is confronted by Harold on the boat, he's sort of pathetic.
Yeah, now that's a shift, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a big shift.
Because really, the villains in this piece are Jeff and the counselor.
Yes.
So you have to sort of say to yourself, and at one point, Jeff has a very good line, which is, Harold says to him, how do you remain so cool? And Jeff says, because I'm on the winning side. And the way things turn out, he is, because he's in with the IRA.
Yeah.
Now, why then is he? If he's in with the IRA, why do you change sides in these circumstances? Because something bigger and better has come along. So now he should be condescending to Harold That's what should drive Harold over the edge. But no, he says, I was scared they were going to kill me. And you think, well,
all right.
what are you talking about?
Sure.
He's meant to have, in my eyes, in a story like this, he's meant to have lost respect for Harold. Now, and I can buy into that if Harold is softening because he wants to go legit, as we said before, that the character thing that we were talking about before. That would all start to make much more sense than it does, and then Harold loses his shit and attacks Jeff.
Yeah,
not because for that reason that he's lost respect for him and he's changed sides. Whereas really, I don't know, he's sort of doing it to avenge Colin Belloc, Paul Freeman, whatever we want to call him. Yeah, it's all a bit muddled, And so Jeff's character, I don't think he's properly thought out. They want a turncoat, but they don't really know how to present him. It seems to me.
No, they don't. I was just sort of like, okay, that's annoying. That's a bit boring. All right, like it just it's disappointing because again, everything that is weighty is all Bob Hoskins. Everything that is weighty is all him. Yeah. And as I was watching, I was thinking about like Get Carter, and the thing that Get Carter has is he's actually trying to investigate a fucking mystery, and Hoskins is not. He is he's telling his guys to go out and do stuff, and I'm like, I need you to be a bit more proactive, man. And this is kind of going back to Peaky Blinders because that's such a more recent example of this. Tommy Shelby is a very proactive individual. He's a nasty gangster, but there are shades of somewhat goodness in him and stuff. But like if he will go and do something. He will do something.
Make things happen.
And the problem with Hoskins' character is he is constantly, I want to say he's more times than not he is reacting to something, except for when he goes to Brixton and is very, very racist. Other than that, he's mostly reacting to things. And to one degree, I enjoy it. It is enjoyable watching his world crumble because on a thematic kind of scale, that is about the British Empire is crumbling. It is gone. It's dead. You know what I mean? Yeah. What was a vast thing not even 100 years prior, or 100 years ago in the Victorian era was, the big thing of the world was the British Empire. That is gone. Britain is a small fry now, and there's so that kind of stuff is interesting, but because the film isn't leaning into certain maybe these thematic beats enough, it's just sort of this is where it's like, I get why Hoskins says this film is important to British cinema, because it is, and it is picking on these things of globalization and the loss of the empire and the political turmoil and the IRA and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff is in here, but it's all just a bit surface. It could have been so much deeper and better if there was focus.
So I agree about the globalization point, and the whole purpose of Harold Shand is that he's lost in international gangsterism. He's a nobody in the wake of that, and whilst the Americans turn their back on him, and he thinks they're weak, really he can't see that he's the problem. Because he is a nobody, and worse than that, he's a pretty useless nobody in terms of how they operate. And that is a metaphor for what Britain had become and has continued to be, really. So that's why I think that's why I suspect Hoskins thinks this is important for British cinema, because the character, the central character, is saying something about the world and the country in which that character resides.
Yeah.
Now, on paper, Harold is solving a mystery like Carter, and the mystery is who's out to get me.
Yeah.
My problem with that is, and it suffers by comparison to Get Carter dramatically, Carter does follow clues. He gets information from one person, and that leads him to another person. Then he gets information from someone else that leads him to a third person, who then, and he only commits gangstery acts when his twisted morality says that they're justified. So throwing the bloke off the car park is because you're a pedo sort of thing, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here, Harold's investigative technique, let's say, is to slash a young lad's backside, which is a very nasty little scene.
Yeah.
And then to get all the local gangsters and hang them upside down in an abattoir until they tell him what he wants to know. And they don't tell him anything.
Yes, because they don't know.
Because they don't know. So his answer is, I'll just beat up whoever and terrorize and torture whoever I need to until I find out what I want to know. And it's also haphazard, whereas Carter is following a definite lead of inquiry.
Yeah.
So from a writing point of view, I think the two characters are doing the same thing, but one writer knows how to do it and the other one isn't quite sure. And just thinks torturing witnesses is the way to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, maybe if more was made of Shan's simpletonness, perhaps that could have gone a long way. And I think that's where the role of the mafia could have been better handled, because they're interesting, but they're barely in it. And they do sort of get their point across. Like, we're not dealing with you. You don't know what the fuck you're doing. We don't. But their excuse is, we don't want to be in bed with gangsters. I'm like, but you are gangsters. I don't understand. I don't buy that as your reason. The reason is this guy is in shambles.
Yeah, well, I think that's what they mean. I think that's my interpretation of that is unprofessional gangsters.
Yeah,
we don't want to be involved with people who are so obviously what they are that it draws attention to themselves. Whereas we can, we blend it. We can go to state functions and people know who we are, but they don't do anything about it because we act in a certain way, sort of thing. I thought that's what it was. But Harold's simplicity, that makes me think of a scene when he's done what he does to Jeff, which I still think is a great scene. It's a nasty scene. It's Victoria, it's Helen Mirren, who gets hold of his wrists. She first of all, she starts giving him a good clout, which he's had coming.
It's true.
And she then holds his wrists and says, essentially, use your brains.
Yeah.
You've got the counsel and now use him.
Yeah.
Because his answer to everything is to throw a punch or shoot a gun or wield a knife. It's her that makes him think with his brain. Yeah. And that's Mirren's input into it, because I bet she didn't do it in the original script.
Probably not.
Probably
not. She probably just stood there.
He stood there wailing, or whatever. So he is. It's a brilliant performance, and I think it's a good character.
It is, yeah.
But it could have been much more rounded, and he could have been. Yeah. He could have had much more of an arc.
Yeah.
And he could have had much more of a demise, I think. Yeah. Although we'll talk about the last scene later.
Yeah. The Long Good Friday is, while it is iconic and it is on a lot of best of lists and will live on, it's living on, I think, predominantly because of Hoskins' performance and not because the strength of the story.
I think it's that, but I would also add, as I said before, the very specific time and place that it was made.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a year either side of this, or 5 years either side of 1980, and it would be meaningless.
Yes.
It's absolutely the right place at the right time with the right central performance. And that's what does the heavy lifting. Those three factors for me are what do the heavy lifting of this film.
Yes. Now I guess speaking of the kind of the ending scenes, it's all a bit chaotic to me, that ending, that we go to the race course. He goes into a room, there's some shooting, throws a guy out a window, cars are crashing. It's like, whoa, 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 whoa,
Yeah,
whoa, whoa.
yeah,
It all goes a bit nuts, and that's the film trying to wrap up the IRA
yeah.
issues.
And it's to
Which,
make Hoskins think he's solved the problem.
yeah. And I'm like, okay, fine. So, like, you know, in theory, I'm like, all right, fine. But at the same time, the IRA have been faceless throughout this whole thing, putting a face to them at the end, and it's just and it's this guy being a race car driver, and I'm just sort of like,
Well,
could this guy not have like been a presence throughout the
yeah,
piece to give me a
there's that.
sense of like, oh, he's finally going to confront this guy or something? I just didn't care. I just
two
didn't care.
things. Two things I would say about that, neither of which disagree with you. First off, I don't know why we're at a stock car race or whatever it is. I don't know why that has to be in a. Why can't they just be in a warehouse or the back room of a pub or something? Why is it
some illegal gambling?
Some illegal gambling? You know, why
Yeah.
is it stock car racing? And why do I get 2 or 3 minutes of him cheering himself because he's won? Who cares? Anyway, the second thing is you get the same effects whilst maintaining their shadowy presence that they've had throughout. If Hoskins just says, we'll take the 60 grand in the suitcase, we'll go and see him, and then we'll be rid of him.
Yeah.
And you see him walk to the pub, an Irish pub. You see him walk out of it, and it blows up.
That would be badass.
You know what I mean?
That'd be badass. Oh, geez,
I would rather that than a stock car race and a bloke eating like his dinner. You know,
yeah, just sitting there
sitting there eating his salad or whatever the hell it is.
Yeah,
and
putting the cream on the salad on his fork. I'm just like,
yeah, what you do? It's all a bit odd. And I would have preferred, because then they maintain that shadowy presence that they've had throughout. Because it's too late to ask me to believe that these are just the IRA.
Yeah,
you know, that the IRA was far too important to just be dropped in at the last minute as two nameless fellas. Oh, one's called O'Flaherty or something. I mean, Jesus.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas
it's like he doesn't stop the IRA. This isn't like Rocky IV where he stops communism. Like, this is
no, because the next scene, the scene after next, they're right back in his face. So but he's stupid, so he thinks he has.
Yeah.
And I just think that would have been a better, something like that would have been better than stock car races and nameless people. Because I think that belittles the threat the IRA have been throughout the film.
Yeah, yeah. Because ultimately, I think what he would have done to them, I mean, I guess we'll get there in just 2 seconds, but his whole organization, the retaliation would have been huge, which I guess is sort of what happens anyway. You know, he then goes to the Savoy, talks to the Americans, they're packing, like, we're done with you. You are chump change. We're not going to work with you, blah, 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 blah. And then he says, he goes out. Go on.
And he says, the only thing that you've ever had to offer is the hot dog. Well, you know, he didn't feel like that 2 hours ago.
Yeah, he's in that state of like, I'm hurt. I need to hurt you.
It's a real tantrum. It's a great speech. I don't want anyone to think that it's not a good speech. It's a brilliant speech, delivered impeccably. But it's just a child's tantrum, and that's what Shand is reduced to. He's just a petulant child in the end.
Yeah,
who's
in
throwing dummies out of prams. He means slicing people to pieces.
And you do get a sense of that, particularly when the American first shows up, and he's like, Shands is so giddy, and he's got all these plans, and he wants them to meet this guy, meet this guy, meet this guy, meet this guy, meet this guy. And the guy's like, the American gangster's like, guy, dude, bro.
Yeah, calm down.
I'll do it in my own time.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's while I'm being very harsh on certain things, some of this stuff is laid out in the script. I just think it could have been just done a little bit more to flesh some of this out. I think we need to I think we needed to see, because basically he comes across as giddy, and then and then by the time he's resolved the IRA problem, or so he thinks, you're sort of like, okay, yeah, this is a gangster movie, so this is how they resolve stuff. So we're gonna move on now. And then when the mafia are like, no, we're done. I'm like, do I buy that? I don't know. I feel like I don't. I'm like, hey, yeah, he solved the problem. He's clearly a guy who, to me, it's like he's clearly a guy who, when people come at him, he comes back at them with force and destroys them. That is literally what he does in the film. So I'm sort of like, but then he's treated as if he's just some sort of rinky-dink gangster, doesn't know what he's doing. I'm like,
well,
balance this out, movie. Balance this out a little bit better.
I think the mafia know that he's, he comes in gloating saying, I paid him 60 grand and I've sorted it. And I think I read into the mafia that they're thinking, you won't have done. They're not that easy to get rid of. And you think you've done it single-handedly with 60 grand and a couple of guns. No.
Yeah.
And we're not going to be around to get our fingers dirty with this lot. No chance.
Yeah.
That this is your problem. This is Britain's problem, not America's.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's another reason why they think he'll be a liability. So I do sort of buy it in a way. What I don't buy then, and again, this is the film not really thinking these things through, is what have they seen in him in the first place to even consider it?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that is it. That's my struggle. That's my struggle. Why did they come over in the first place? Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. What has he done to make him so? Because there's no indication that they want to take him over.
No.
The implication is they're going to be partners.
Yeah.
So what has he done? Because the way he equips himself throughout the next 2 hours wouldn't impress a mafia member, I'm pretty certain. So what was it in the first place that made him think this bloke's worth getting into bed with? That then leads them at the end to say, not a chance, you're not what we thought.
Yeah.
Again, it's not quite finishing the arc, or not bearing the arc in mind.
Yeah. But I think maybe you have maybe hit the nail on the head, though, with the idea of it being like, these problems aren't going to go away, and they're just going to get louder and louder and shine a light on us. Therefore, we don't want to work with you.
We can't afford to be seen to be, is there there's a line in one of the Nolan Batman films.
I was going to say, I was just thinking that we can't be seen to be doing whatever it is
you're accused of being.
Seem to be doing.
Yeah, we can't afford to be seen to be doing business with whatever it is
you're accused of being.
And I think that's what the mafia is doing. The mafia is saying, we can't be associated one way or the other with the IRA. That's too much heat. Even that will bring too much heat on us, and we've not survived for all these years without learning when to walk away. That's my takeaway from it.
Yeah, and again, maybe this is a thing where if the mafia figures were more of a character, because everyone is so sparsely used, and maybe that's my problem. Maybe if there was just more meat to some of these things, it would feel.
It only needs a couple of lines. It only needs a couple of lines from someone, and a couple of extra scenes instead of the rubbish we get at the beginning.
Yeah,
but like I said at the outset, this is Hoskins' show at the expense of some other people who are quite important to the plot.
Yeah.
For the plot to actually work.
Yeah. Now, obviously, I mean, we've been saying this whole time, like, oh, well, he thinks he solved it. He obviously, yes, he thinks he solved the problem, and lo and behold, he hasn't solved the problem. He leaves the Savoy, gets in a car, they speed off, and he's like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And then he realizes the guys in the front are not his driver. It is the guys from the pool and Pierce Brosnan with his gun pointing at him. And there's that great scene where they're driving away and they pass by Helen Mirren in her car, and she is also, she didn't want to die. They're both going to die now. Exactly what the mafia were saying. You don't know what you're doing. We don't want to be in bed with this kind of stuff. This is too much. We're done. Goodbye. And there we go. And then
you have what is without a doubt one of the best screen close-ups I've ever come across.
Mm. It is like,
I
how
love
long is
this.
it? How long is it?
I don't know. Is it 2 or 3 minutes?
It's a good couple minutes
And
for sure of just Bob Hoskins' face.
just his face and the run of emotions that he goes through. You know,
Mm.
laughing at how clever he thought he'd been, and now realizes how stupid he's been.
Mm.
Anger, fear,
Yeah.
resignation, and maybe fuck it. At the end,
Yeah.
all of which, the music's dead loud at this point, and
Yeah. Well, it's his big theme, that his little
it's his big
happy
theme that's playing right. Yeah,
disco poppy theme. Yeah.
and it's something to do with the director was just like constantly yelling direction at him while he was doing it. So he's doing it, he's responding to direction,
Mm.
and the music is to cover like the sort of exterior sounds that are going on around it.
Mm.
But what a close, and the camera don't move; it stays on him.
Mm.
I mean, that's a sort of, I think that should be shown in acting schools, because I think that is really
It
good.
probably is. I'm sure it is.
Really good, and it is the right ending,
Mm.
because you know what's going to happen to him, and like you said throughout, he deserves everything that's coming to him.
Yeah.
And
Well, I
Jeff is
like that
proved
it's
right. Jeff is proved right. He was on the winning side.
yes, and I do like the fact that we don't actually see him get killed
Yeah.
because you can. It's suggested that that's what's going to happen, but you don't actually know. Maybe he doesn't
Well,
die.
there was a proposed sequel.
I was going to talk about that. I was going to bring that up. Keefe wrote a sequel called Black Easter Monday, and it was to take place 20 years after the events of the first film. And apparently, the car that Shan's in, gets pulled over by the cops, and he escapes and runs off to Jamaica to hide. But then he's got to be a racist again.
Yeah.
He's got to be a racist again, and he needs to come back to the East End to clean it up because there's all these Afro-Caribbean people that are ruining the neighborhood. And I just thought, when I read that, I just thought maybe this Barrie Keeffe is a racist cunt. I just thought, man, what is your problem? What is your problem? Why do you think who hurts you, man?
Yeah, you see, so 20 years
Gee.
after that would be like 99, 2000, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't remember there being any Afro-Caribbean threats to world peace at that time.
No.
The IRA were a genuine one. I think
Yeah.
Afro-Caribbeans were not. So
Yeah. I mean, I guess
where's that coming from?
We're talking London, we're talking gangsters, we're talking gangs. Like there's gang stuff going on. But like it's okay. You clearly, Keefe. I do feel that Barrie Keeffe just has a problem with. I think he has a problem with black people. I think he's racist, and maybe he's not. This is I don't know for a fact, but the reading, and this is this complicated thing where it's like you read something, and maybe what you're reading or what you're seeing is filled with these sorts of themes, and it's a theme for a reason, but again, we've just watched this movie about a nasty motherfucker. And then the
Well,
idea of the sequel is he's going to go back and do more of what he did in that one scene in Brixton.
yeah. But the difference for me is this. In the long Good Friday, Shand is the racist. There's no indication that Keefe is. Shand is the racist. And the threat that he is facing was a real one.
Yes.
The difference in Black Easter Monday, whatever it's called, is Shand will still be a racist, but the threat this time is purely made up. And
Keefe decided the threat
and
is just
the made up
black
threat
people
is
existing
black
in
people.
East London.
That's where I don't
Yikes.
dismiss what you're saying out of hand.
Yeah,
and saying you've got no evidence for it, because that is a big problem.
Yeah,
that is a big problem, because
Like-
all the stuff they say about, I mean, they're constantly calling the Irish micks and paddies in this, and that is also racist.
Yes,
But people like Shand, and I have to say, respectable people in the late 70s and early 80s would have called Irish people micks and paddies. It wasn't just people like Harold Shand and the people he represents. There was we know there was a lot of racist language used openly in those less informed times.
Yeah.
So Shand is a racist. There's no denying that. But he's not just racist towards blacks. He's racist towards almost everything, as far as I can see. And the sensibilities that he has towards the IRA would have been, people would have understood those in 1981. They would have probably agreed with them in 1981.
Yeah.
In 1999 or 2000, I can't see anybody agreeing that Afro-Caribbeans were a dangerous threat that needed Harold Shand to come and clean them up. Not in a million years.
No, other than just other racist people who then in another 16 years will then vote for Brexit.
Oh yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing, I mean, thank God it wasn't made for those reasons, and because getting the cops to pick him up and rescue him is so cheap that it would have ruined that ending.
Yeah.
Whereas that ending is really all that needs to be said on Harold Shand.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
So thank God it never happened.
He's not a person I would. This isn't a film that I'm like, oh, I need to rewatch this film. This is a film that's like, I've seen it enough now. I don't need to see it more times. I am good. I am fine. I'm glad I watched it for Bob Hoskins' performance. It was fun to see that snapshot of 1980s London that was dirty and still stuck in this sort of quasi-Victorian dilapidated state, not that kind of that was fun. But for all these reasons that we talked about, these character aspects, I'm just sort of like, you are not people I want to hang out with. And look, I'm I'm not saying Keefe is 100% a racist. I'm just saying these scenes were very it's a very uncomfortable film because there is racism in the film, and the fact that the sequel would have been even more of Shand being like that. I'm just sort of like, what is the thing that is making you want to tell this story? Because Shand is such an irredeemable piece of shit that I can't see him being. There's nothing good going. He's not going to do anything good. He's just going to be a jackass.
Yeah, that's right. The difference, the key difference for me is, and again, I'm banging on about this being the right place at the right time, and it was. But 20 years later, the world was a different place.
Yeah.
And you couldn't tell this, even a story remotely like this, in this way. It would have been a terrible mistake, I think.
Yeah.
A terrible mistake. Because time moves on, thankfully. Yeah. And films that were made around this time of this sort all had this same sort of nasty, racist, violent thread, because they thought it was cutting edge. And at the time it was cutting edge. At the time it was reflecting what real life was like for some people. And because there will have been people in Brixton that thought like Harold Shand. I mean, that's the sad reality of it.
Yeah.
And there will be some people sitting in the theatre audience thinking, well, yeah, and those people may have thought, we need a bit of Harold Shand, maybe. We can't look at it like that. We can't look at it. We can, as long as we say this is the right place at the right time. And this is of its time and of its place, because that's what
Yeah.
Britain was like then, you know.
Yeah.
But
And I guess that's really all it is. I mean, that's all you can really say about it, is that it is this snapshot. It is a, I'm not gonna say the perfect snapshot, but it is a compelling snapshot of early '80s Britain and these particular issues that were being dealt with, or not
yeah,
being dealt with, but were being experienced by various demographics.
yeah,
And we're really following this East End, this East Ender who is this East End gangster who is out of his depth, definitely definitely a racist, and gets the ending he deserves because he is not a nice guy.
not a nice fella. No, not
You
a nice
know,
fella. But
it's yeah.
and the celebrity gangster, for want of a better, for like the
Mm,
Crays,
mm,
and to a certain point, I suppose the Richardsons, they were. He keeps talking about 10 years. We've had 10 years of no trouble, and that's 10 years
mm,
since the Crays had vanished.
mhm,
So, and I think Ronnie Cray wrote to Hoskins about this and said, that's how it was. That's how
mm,
it was. But that's an aside. Um, the celebrity gangster had almost disappeared by this time, pretty
yeah,
much. So that
yeah,
they were these sort of people. They didn't have any class anymore. They didn't have any style.
yeah,
The Crays were all the best suits, Savile Row suits, and all the rest of it, and they were seen at celebrity parties and stuff. You
mm,
know, and but that era passed. That era
mm,
passed. They were now just the violent thugs that Harold Shand is.
yeah,
That, and it captures that essence of what life
mm,
was like. That's
yeah,
that for me is where the film shines.
yeah. I can
That
see
and
that.
Hoskins' performance is where it. But if you look at it in isolation, I think it's a remarkable piece of work. If you
Mm,
look at it, outside of itself,
mm,
all these issues come to light.
yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Well,
Which
should we
leaves me in a
rate it?
real dilemma about how to rate it.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, as you know, the returning listeners will know that we rate all of our films out of 5 Falcons, 1 being the worst and 5 being the best. How in the hell do we rate The Long Good
I don't know.
Friday?
I don't know.
Uh,
I find this a
I
real difficult one to do. I really do.
yeah. I mean, I think I'm not going to reiterate all my problems with it. I think I've made my problems with it clear, but Hoskins' performance, his performance is good despite his, his character is nasty, but I can separate those two. The dialogue is cracking dialogue even when it's problematic. It is he called it Shakespearean, Hoskins did. And I get what he means about it, the way it sort of flows. It
Yeah,
has
I
that
get what
sort
he
of,
means about that.
if you ever seen the show The Thick of It, the way that sort of
Yeah,
it has that kind of, yeah. I But there are a lot of problems. Overbloated characters. Da, 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 da. I think I think I'll be generous-ish with this one, and maybe and I,
it
I
is
think I'm
tough.
just gonna
This.
give it 3 Falcons. I'm gonna give it 3 Falcons. It's I think Hoskins is right when he says it's important for British cinema because of what you said as well. The era that it captures is a
Yeah.
nasty nasty era, and if you and maybe that is worth preserving in some sense, because it's like this is what it was like, and we should not go back to this. And that is a reading you could have of this, and I'm okay with that. I'm fine with
Hmm.
looking at this and be like, okay, that was a really nasty film full of nasty people that is a relatively accurate representation of what a huge portion of the population like,
Was
and
like,
also what
yeah.
that threat of the IRA was like for people. So yeah, so I think it is a very complicated one because it is just a nasty film, but captures the nastiness accurately.
Arguably too well.
Maybe, yeah. So I'll stick with 3. I really want to. I'm tempted to be like 2.5, but
I don't think it's as bad as that. I don't think it
yeah,
deserves
that's
that.
my problem. I think just I'm just middle of the road because there are lots of problems, but there
Now,
is some skill in there
I put
along
this
the
on.
way.
I put this on to watch in readiness for this, thinking I'm going to give. I'll be giving this a 4. I think because, like I say, I watched this when I was about 10,
Mm.
and as a 10-year-old in 1984, so it's still quite a new film then.
Yeah. It's a few years old.
It will have seemed really visceral to me, and I won't have
Yeah.
picked up on the issues that we've now talked about. And some of those issues, as I've tried to explain, some of those issues wouldn't have been issues back in those days. You know, some of the racist language wouldn't have been an issue back in those days, sadly.
Yeah.
So, but looking at it now, I try not to look at things through a modern. I try not to look at things from the past. I try and look at things from the past in the time that they were made and produced, rather than through, because I don't think it's always fair to look at it through a modern prism. But you can't escape the fact that this is a period piece, and it hasn't really aged great.
No, or if you compare something like The Pool of London, which tackled racism but is very, very good.
Yeah. And if you look at something like Get Carter, which tackles social issues, but also provides a story and a character that is much more refined, not refined in the sense of tastes or anything, but I mean, as a work of fiction, as a fictional construct, much more refined than this. I think this suffers again from maybe one more run through of the script would have helped. But there are some knockout scenes. So I toyed with 3 as well as during the discussion. I was going to start out with a 4, and I toyed with 3. So I'm going to go down the middle of my 2 sensibilities. I think for a film, looking at it from a modern perspective, it's a 3. Looking at it as a snapshot of a piece of social history that I lived through, it's a 4. So I'll come down in the middle and I'll give it 3.5.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. So,
but I really struggle with that. I really struggle with that because it is an important film. It's an important British film.
Yeah,
and it was doing important things, but it hasn't aged.
Yeah, well, it in
as well as it could have
hindsight
done.
has done important things. What I would be interested to know is did it set out to do important things, or did it just set out to do
No,
a gangster movie?
I think it set out to do a gangster movie, and I think it set out to be as nasty as it could.
Yeah,
In which case, it succeeds admirably.
It does succeed, but then that pulls into question the mindset behind the artists behind the piece, which is where some of my discomfort and sort of like, because sometimes
definitely.
you can just read something, you can see something, and you can feel that, ooh,
it certainly couldn't be made now. Nobody could remake this and it wouldn't have the same effect at all. I don't think.
No,
and it wouldn't be the same film. It would just be, you might as well just set the bare bones of the story and create something new. But if you look at reviews online about this film, they almost all do the same thing, and that is, as we've done, and that is praise Hoskins, and praise praise Mirren, and praise the sort of social history being captured.
Yeah. I think those.
And so I agree with something you said earlier. I think the importance of this film, or the success of this film, perhaps, is camouflaged by praise for Hoskins.
Yeah,
and it's well-deserved praise for Hoskins.
Yeah,
But I think if you take that and put it to one side in a little box and forget about it, you're left with a pretty grimy, nasty little cheap thriller.
I think so. Well, on that note,
yeah,
I think we
but if
can
people haven't
close
seen
this
it, they should watch it.
investigation. I agree. If you've not seen it, it's worth a watch. It's worth a watch. I'm not saying it's worth owning, but it's worth a watch.
Yeah, I don't own it. And
it's on Prime. Watch it on Prime.
Watch it on Prime. Yeah, watch it on Prime.
Yeah. It's not worth adding to the collection in my opinion, but it's worth seeing, once, maybe. But yeah, with that said, I think we've thoroughly investigated The Long Good Friday. We've given it our ratings. I think we can put this one in the drawer and file it away as done and dusted. So we will be back next week with another episode. So in the meantime, leave us a review on Apple, leave us a rating on Spotify, throw your comments on any of these platforms. We'll engage with them. We like to see that. And make sure you're telling your friends about the podcast, because if you got any noir loving friends, let them know. But until next week, take care walking down those mean streets. Just want to give a quick shout out to our paying patrons. We have Steve from the Boxing Movie Podcast.
We have Garm 1981.
And we have Gregory Sandoval. They are our initial ground floor patrons. So if you want to join Mean Streets and become a patron and get access to cool perks, make sure you head over to our Patreon page and subscribe today for as low as $1 a month.